of a permanent court of international arbitration, which has been deeply criticized. Of course, permanent court of arbitration has accepted Italy's claim on jurisdiction and rejected India's claim on jurisdiction. But this particular judgment, this preliminary judgment, is heavily being criticized by various jurists throughout the world. I would pick up the critique of this particular interim judgment, which has come up on 21st of May 2020, which was made public on the website in July 2020. Before moving on to further discuss the legality of the particular case, there are certain principles which are yet to be covered, but those are now directly related to the interpretation of the judgment of the case. So first and foremost, I would be discussing what India contended in this particular case in its laws. First of all, I would like you to know how I will be moving forward. This webinar would not be as long as yesterday. I expect this to finish in like 40 to 45 minutes. In first 25, 30 odd minutes, I would be talking about the jurisdiction aspect of this particular case, the question of jurisdiction. So basically, I would term it as in my paper, answering the question of jurisdiction involving Enrica Lexi arbitration. Also, in this particular aspect, first I would be dealing with the international law question, and then I would be talking about the defense of India, quoting various domestic laws, along with domestic laws being in tune with UNCLOS in general and other international law norms in general. And I would also discuss how the concept of incidental jurisdiction, what is incidental jurisdiction, we will talk about that, don't worry, but how this concept of incidental jurisdiction prejudiced India's case in front of permanent court of arbitration. I already told you that this particular, what would be the international repercussions, or what would be the repercussions for future jurisprudence of this particular interim judgment. We hope that the having due regard to the dignity of permanent court of arbitration, we hope to expect a more saner final judgment in this particular case, which expresses the already established jurisprudence of UNCLOS, as well as of the various judgments delivered by permanent court of arbitration. To all those, there may be some people who have joined only today. Permanent court of arbitration, we are talking about Enrica Lexi arbitration according to Annexure 7 of UNCLOS, because the voluntary methods failed, and according to chapter 15 of UNCLOS, the matter went to permanent court of arbitration, The Hague. Permanent court of arbitration is not itself it's an institution, of course, but it's not in itself a court. It actually The main function of permanent court of arbitration is to administratively facilitate international arbitrations. Okay. uh, the jurisdiction of permanent court of arbitration is not only limited to UNCLOS or law of the sea. There has been range of cases, both commercial and non-commercial, international law questions, other related disputes regarding state responsibility, etc. There are range of disputes which has been taken care of by permanent court of arbitration in its long history of jurisprudence. Not only the UNCLOS related articles, but according to UNCLOS 1982 Annexure 7, whatever case goes to permanent court of arbitration from UNCLOS, that has a limit, and that limit is decided by Article 288 and Article 293 of UNCLOS, which I will be dealing with in a while. Uh, having said that, there is one more important fact. Of course, you all know, but it's my duty to reiterate that this particular arbitral tribunal for Enrica Lexi case or otherwise, these are ad hoc tribunal which are constituted only for the purpose of settling the disputes between the parties. As and when the dispute gets settled, the tribunal dissolves. Okay. This is how permanent court of arbitration actually works. whenever a dispute arises, the tribunal is constituted. Here, in this particular case, there's a 5-member tribunal which is being constituted, and the preliminary judgment which has come is not in favor of India. It is in favor of Italy by 3-2. I specifically do not remember the names of the judges, but these 3 judges who have favored Italy's argument is including the president of this particular tribunal from Russia, the judge, another judge from Italy, and another judge from one of the European country, and the countries which and the judges which have given the dissenting opinion are from are just is one is Justice P.S. Rao from India, and another judge is from Jamaica. Okay, of course, the third world countries are together. Anyway, so uh, before explaining the international law question in this particular case, I want you, actually I missed out a fact, a very important fact, is regarding this freezing of diplomatic relationship between India and Italy after the incident. This incident actually had a larger repercussion on India and EU in general, and Italy in particular, the bilateral and multilateral relationships of India with them. Also, uh, in fact, this particular dispute delayed our entering into missile technology control regime. Italy blocked our MCTR joining in October 2015, citing India's conduct and stating that we are not part of NPT, etc., etc. That is a different question altogether. But yes, after 1 year, once the relationship between India and Italy got well, uh, India got entered in 2016 in MCTR. It also hampered our ties with European Union in these years. But now, with time, of course, time heals everything, and with time, the relationship between India and Italy and India and EU is again starting to get better. Of course, there are some selfish interest of India, there are some selfish interest of EU, especially after Brexit and the era of deglobalization we are in, etc., etc. Those are international relations questions, which is out of the purview of this webinar. Now, coming to the Enrica Lexi case. India contended that Italy breached India's freedom of navigation under Article 87(1)(a), Article 90, and according to Article 58. I wish to read these 3 important articles along with you, and will try to interpret this uh, uh, in relevance to this particular case. First, I would read Article 87(a), 1A. So, Article 87(1)(a) is on the screen, and which says that the high seas are open to all states, whether coastal or landlocked. Freedom of high seas is exercised under the conditions laid down by the convention and by other rules of international law. So freedom of high seas constitute what India contended, that freedom of high seas constitute freedom of navigation. Yes, Italy had freedom of navigation, but it has to be read with clause 2. These freedoms shall be exercised by all states with due regard to the interest of other states. Interest, you are not supposed to infringe the interest of other state, and one of the interest is that you cannot be killing our citizens while moving freely in our waters, or even international waters closer to our country. You would go from our country, you would be traversing from our country and killing our citizens. No, this is not done, and this violates Article 87(1)(a) and Article 87(2). Another important thing is Article 90, which says that right to navigation. Every state, whether coastal or landlocked, has the right to sail ships flying its flag on the high seas. Correct. India said, yes, you have Article 90, but it has to be read with Article 87 too. And another important article, that is Article 58, which says that, uh, just one, yeah, rights and duties of other states in exclusive economic zone. It says that in the exclusive economic zone, all states, whether coastal or landlocked, enjoy, subject to relevant provisions of the convention, the freedom referred to in Article 87 of navigation and overflight, and of the laying of submarine cables and other internationally lawful use of sea. Internationally lawful use of the sea is the key word. You can use these high seas or international waters only for lawful purposes, not to kill Indian citizens. That's what our argument was according to Article 58. That's it. Only this much is relevant here. So these were India's contention regarding that Italy has breached India's freedom to navigation under the convention as laid down in Article 87(1)(a), 90, and 58. Another important argument which India also argued, sorry, now Italy argued that, okay, fine, we agree to your contention, but then you violated sovereign immunity of Italian Marines. Sovereign immunity, matlab, these Italian Marines were on government duty uh, regarding vessel protection detachment, the VPD duty on an oil tanker to protect it from piracy. Especially, I talked about that it is a high risk zone. Especially also I talked about how IMO expanded 65° east to 78° east, etc. How the whole of Arabian Sea is termed as, is branded as a high risk area to piracy, and sovereign immunity of Marines who were officially conducting duties for international peace and security was violated according to Article 95, Article 96, and Article 97. Let's read them once. Article 95: immunity of warships on the high seas. Warships on the high seas have complete immunity from the jurisdiction of any state other than the flag state. मतलब जिस whatever nation, whatever flag that particular warship is carrying, only that flag state can have jurisdiction, irrespective of what kind of offenses have been are conducted or uh, they are actually committed uh, within lieu of that particular vessel or warship. But mind it, this particular Enrica Lexi was a private oil tanker, not warship. So India contended Article 95 does not apply, my lordship. And Article 96: immunity of ship used only on government non-commercial ships services. Ships owned and operated by a state and used only on government non-commercial service shall, on the high seas, have complete immunity of the Jews. Again, non-commercial use nahi tha, it was for commercial use. Enrica Lexi was used for commercial purposes. Therefore, Article 96 also will not apply. I don't know, the particular contender from Italy's side was high on something, but these were the arguments which were made, and I don't know. These are outright, these can be outrightly refuted on a preliminary reading of a class 6th boy or a girl. And anyway, Article 97: penal jurisdiction in matters of collision and other incident of navigation. How will penal jurisdiction apply on cases in the incident of collision or any other incident of navigation? मैं पहले ही इसको पढ़ने से पहले I would clarify that this incident was not the matter of collision. There was no collision between Enrica Lexi and St. Anthony. Number one, St. Anthony was the name of the ship on which fishermen were there. Number one. Number two, any other incident of navigation. This is also not an incident of navigation, my lordships. This is an incident of murder. This is an incident of crime. This is a brutal murder uh, of honest and peaceful fishermen who were just going there for commercial purposes in search of fish, nothing else. You mistook them as pirates. It is your problem, not ours. So before reading that, I wanted to clarify this. Neither a collision nor an incident of a navigation. Anyway, Article 97 won't apply, but still, even if there are certain legal questions, we would take care of that. In the event of a collision or any other incident of navigation concerning a ship on the high seas, involving the penal or disciplinary responsibility of the master or any other person in the service of the ship, VPD is considered as the service of the ship because these naval officers are posted for the security of oil tankers or any commercial vehicle. No penal or disciplinary proceedings may be instituted against such person except before the judicial or administrative authorities either of the flag state or the state which such person is a national. So if in case it was a collision or it was an incident of navigation, we could actually think of the jurisdiction of Italy would apply. But still, now you would be like, I'm refuting every argument how Italy got jurisdiction in PCOA is a magic or what. No, it's not magic. uh, what PCA could not do direct, I'm talking about these direct interpretations. Okay, what PCA could not do directly, it has done indirectly. That is called incidental jurisdiction, which I will be discussing at length. But before that, we'll just finish up those easy concept first. Okay, 97.2. In disciplinary matters, the state which has issued a master's certificate, that's not important for us. No arrest or detention of the ship, even as a measure of investigation. Even as a measure of investigation. So prompt measure का तो concept ही नहीं है. Article 292 we are not even talking about in cases where there was collision or there was a problem of navigation. So Article 292 को भी ये supersede करता है 97.3. No arrest or detention of the ship, even as a measure of investigation, shall be ordered by any authorities other than those of the flag state. Okay, having said that, having discussed the arguments made by Italy with respect to sovereign immunity of marines, कि भाई they were because of these two provisions, India jurisdiction, so all those are directly getting refuted in this particular case. Okay, but things have become very complex in this particular case. Anyway, now PCOA has given the jurisdiction to Italy. Discussing this case is only for academic purposes, and we hope that in future this jurisprudence gets repealed or is not followed as it is supposed to be. Only then we can see that the regime on the law of the sea remains secure from counter perspectives and interpretations. Of course, you know now by what do you mean by a dispute under unclause. A dispute under unclause is nothing but, according to Article 279, it is just uh, the differences of opinion with respect to interpretation and application of the provision of unclause or any other provision of international law related to the subject matter of the convention of the law of the seas. Okay. Now, with respect to the challenge of jurisdiction of so some critique says that PCOA has taken cognizance of this case under Annexure 7. Some jurists say that this particular taking of cognizance is itself wrong preliminarily, and how they argue it with a debate on the concept of principal norms and the concept of incidental norms. What is principal norms? Principal norms are those norms which are expressly listed in a convention to give jurisdiction to a particular tribunal. What are those provisions in unclause are Article 288 and Article 293. I'm sorry, before I said 291, I'm sorry. Article 288 and Article 293. So we will now read Article 288 and start analyzing the same. Article 288. See, this is directly called the jurisdiction clause. Okay. A court or a tribunal referred to in Article 287. That 287 was forum shopping. Those four options you have in case voluntary methods are not successful. Choice of procedure. Okay. A court or tribunal referred to in Article 287 shall have jurisdiction over any dispute concerning the interpretation or application of this convention which is submitted to it in accordance with this part. Again, we would give it a thoughtful reading. A court or tribunal, I would read it now in perspective of Permanent Court of Arbitration. The Permanent Court of Arbitration under Article 287 shall have jurisdiction over this dispute concerning the interpretation or application of the unclause which is submitted to it in accordance with part 15 of this convention. This is how it will be read. Now, so Italy went to the Permanent Court of Arbitration because it laws में उनको diplomatic provisional measures मिले, which Anita yesterday asked. I think she's not there today, but that girl Anita asked that Article 292 के according अगर prompt release का order आया ordered 3 years down the line and it is said that it should be done within 10 days. No, prompt release ka order we have Italy has requested much before, and what we were discussing yesterday was the provision of provisional measures under Article 290 clause 5. Okay, but With respect to those provisional measures, Italy was not satisfied because it was a kind of a diplomatic answer, which could not satisfy the interest of Italy, which could not satisfy the release of marines from India's jurisdiction. That was their interest. So they went to PCOA and argued that sovereign immunity of marines are getting challenged in this particular case, and they gave the argument of 95, 96, and 97 without invoking the principal norm according to Article 288, without invoking the jurisdiction clause. They went on from an incidental perspective of sovereign immunity कि ऐसे नहीं तो ऐसे permanent court of arbitration का jurisdiction को establish करना पड़ेगा, so that Italy gets the judgment in their own favor in future. So, permanent court of arbitration was erroneous in this particular aspect because it ignored the principal norm and took care of the incidental argument given by the Italy. So, Article 288 of UNCLOS is regarding the interpretation. So jurisdiction of permanent court of arbitration is only limited to the interpretation and application of the provisions of UNCLOS. PCA under Annexure 7 is barred from adjudicatory claims that do not involve interpretation and application of UNCLOS. A combined reading of Article 288 and 293. 293 is regarding the applicable law. I'll just show you that article. It is not that relevant for Enrique Alexi. Applicable law. A court or tribunal having jurisdiction under this section shall apply this convention and other rules of international law, which are not incompatible with this convention. So only these. So any international law norm and UNCLOS norm shall be applied by the permanent court of arbitration. So a combined reading of the jurisdiction clause and the applicable law clause under Article 293 was discussed in Mox Plant case, MOX capital, Mox Plant case, and it was said that there exists a cardinal distinction between the two provisions. This was extended by jurists as understood like this. Uh, so jurist went on stating that prioritizing the Article 288 is justified on the basis of lex specialis, LEX SPECIALIS, that specialized law should be given primacy over general law. So that is the argument in international law. According to Vienna Convention, the special law is supposed to give you should be giving more primacy to than the general law. So applying the notion of lex specialis, Article 288 should be given primacy, and since Article 288 specifically instructs a tribunal, that is a permanent court of arbitration, on principal norms to be applied. So once you have given primacy to lex specialis according to Article 288, that is, you have given jurisdiction to PCOA according to Article 288. That is, you have actually opened up and restricted the jurisdiction of court of arbitration only with respect to application and interpretation of United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. But Italy claimed with respect to sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity is nowhere there in UNCLOS. It has nothing to do with the law of the sea. So therefore, permanent court of arbitration should have outrightly rejected this particular jurisdiction, stating that we don't have jurisdiction. Why am I saying you this? Is because they have their own ruling with respect to the same. These are not my words. These are words of permanent court of arbitration in prior cases. Technically, they should have followed what they have themselves laid the jurisprudence. Okay, so in Chagos marine protection, a protected area arbitration, there was an arbitration. Chagos marine protected area arbitration, permanent court of arbitration stated that, quote unquote, where the real issue, that is principal norm, where the real issue and the object of the claim are unrelated, principal norm, that is Article 288, and sovereign immunity are unrelated to the interpretation and application of the UNCLOS, an incidental connection between the issues would be insufficient. So what cannot be answered by the principal norm, usually कभी कभी क्या होता है कि principal norms is not able to satisfy the claim. Okay, then to aid only that aspect, कि principal norm gets invoked, there are certain incidental matters which are taken cognizance of, which are directly connected to principal norm. They should not be haywire. Like sovereign immunity has nothing to do with unclause interpretation. Sovereign immunity is entirely different area of international law. And here we are in Article 288 as a principal norm. We are under the area of law of the sea of international law. So I will read this again. Excuse me. In Chagos Marine Protected Area Arbitration, PCA stated that when the real issue and the object of the claim are unrelated to the interpretation and application of unclause, an incidental connection of the between the issues would be insufficient to bring the dispute within the jurisdiction of this tribunal. These are the words of tribunal, no one else. Okay. Also, I will quote and unquote them from recent South China Sea arbitration as well. Okay, but before that, let's discuss incidental jurisdiction in Enrica Lexi case, in this particular case. So tribunal said, in this particular case, tribunal said it could exercise jurisdiction over the question of immunity since the issue was an incidental question that necessarily presents itself in the application of the convention in respect to the dispute before it. I find this absurd. It said that the sovereign immunity question is very much important to be answered by this particular tribunal to actually interpret and apply the convention in this particular case. I find it really absurd. Okay, why I find it really absurd is my reasoning taken from South China Sea arbitration case that was again decided by the same tribunal. Let me go there. So before going there, I will complete the statement. It could exercise. It said that, quote unquote, it could exercise jurisdiction over the question of immunity since the issue was an incidental question that necessarily presents itself in the application of the convention in respect to the dispute before it, namely which party is entitled to jurisdiction over the incident. It said what it said is the main question in this particular case, that is Enrica Lexi case, is that which country will have jurisdiction to try the case. But jurist says that the main question is not about jurisdiction. Main question is about two things. Number one, was it an internationally wrongful act, and the location of commission of this act, does it entitle India for the jurisdiction? So this is the main contention, not this sovereign immunity question or incidentally invoking through creative interpretation, taking cognizance of this case. Okay, so why it is wrong, I would express it with the wordings of Permanent Court of Arbitration, not quoting any jurist right now, directly their own ruling. Tribunal didn't follow, which I feel, uh, quote unquote objective approach, and they said that in South China Sea that there should be an objective approach while deciding whether Permanent Court of Arbitration has jurisdiction or not. So that objective standard or objective approach is not followed here, number one, and didn't isolate the real issue as laid down in South China Sea. South China Sea में कहा गया कि whenever a case comes in front of Permanent Court of Arbitration, it is duty bound to isolate the real issue from the incidental one. Over here, it took cognizance of the case with the reasoning of an incidental argument and made it a main argument. Whereas the overall dispute with respect to principal interpretation and application of unclause remained unanswered in this particular case, in the preliminary judgment. Okay, so question हमने पूछा था, when we went there and we asked this question, Permanent Court of Arbitral Tribunal Lordships, whether, just answer this, whether the Marines enjoy immunity from India's criminal jurisdiction or not. This was the exact question we asked. And the answer to that, which they have given, is this, which I have just read. It could exercise jurisdiction over the question of immunity since the issue was an incidental question that necessarily presents itself in the application of the convention in respect of the dispute before it. That's क्या पूछा और क्या answer दिया, God knows. Anyway, number two important contention, the important principle of necessity is ignored. This is by famous jurist Scarts. Scarts says in this particular, Scarts is a famous jurist in international law of the sea. Uh, He says that the important principle of necessity is entirely ignored in this preliminary judgment. The question of immunity was not preliminary in nature. The main question was that of an internationally wrongful act, which has been entirely ignored by Permanent Court of Arbitration in this particular case. So this is the international law aspect of jurisdiction in this particular case. And now I would be discussing a mix of India's contention since 2012, invoking its domestic principles and international law principles. So it will be a mix of argument. And this is the last part of my presentation today. So, number one, the Union of India does not have, so what Italy claimed is the Union of India does not have jurisdiction to try this case according to Article 94, Clause 7 and Article 97 of UNCLOS. Okay, let's read that. Article 94, we will read first. 94, Clause 4. Duties of flag state. Every state shall effectively exercise its jurisdiction and control in administrative, technical, and social matters over ships flying its state. Matlab, it is Italy is supposed to take care that no criminal activity is undertaken uh, under its flag on a high sea or in international water. In particular, every state shall maintain a register. That's not important. Those are procedural aspects. Third point, every state shall take measures for ships flying its state flag as are necessary to ensure safety at sea. Safety at sea also means safety of those fishermen who were killed. With regard to inter alia, the construction, equipment, seaworthiness of the ship, the manning of ship, labor conditions and training, the use of signals, the maintenance of communications, and prevention of collision. The use of signals. Whenever there's a important what we say, there's an important convention, usually convention, not this international convention. There's a usual practice in the international waters that whenever your fishermen are out for fishing, you give a you give a strong signal around to the ship to the ships and warships traveling through international waters around your country, so that there is no collision, there is no misunderstanding, etc., etc. So over here I argue that there must have some kind of alert, or there must have been some kind of an alarm with respect to these fishermen, which was ignored by Enrica Lexi or these Italian marines on board. Okay, such measures include those necessary to ensure that each ship before registration and thereafter at appropriate intervals are surveyed with, that's not important, that each ship is in charge of a master or officers who possess appropriate qualification, and particular the seamanship, navigation, communication, marine engineering, etc. That's also not important, that the master officers and to the appropriate extent appropriate, the crew and are fully conversant with and required to observe the applicable international regulation concerning the circumstances of life at sea. Okay, they are supposed to be well capable. They can't say it is a mistake of fact. They should be able to distinguish between those who are pirates and those who are innocent fishermen. The prevention of collision, prevention, reduction, and control of marine pollution, and maintenance of collision and otherwise. In taking the measures called on in paragraph 3 and 4, each state is required to conform to generally accepted international regulations, procedure, and practice. These are whenever UNCLOS talks about generally accepted international regulation, procedure, and practices, those are laid down by International Maritime Organization with respect to commercial activities in the sea, and to take any steps which may be necessary to secure their observance. The state which has clear grounds to believe that proper jurisdiction and control with respect to a ship have not been exercised may report facts to the flag state. Upon receiving such a report, the flag state shall investigate the matter and, if appropriate, take any action necessary to remedy the situation. This was the basic content. They said that this was violated, even if these Italian marines have killed have unknowingly or innocently killed, innocently is a ironical word, unknowingly killed these fishermen, then India must have alerted Italy first rather than detaining them. Acha, okay, we would alert you, and this particular ship would go out of India's water. It would go out of the reach of Indian Navy and Coast Guards. Okay, so that was not taken well by India. And another important provision, which especially the main provision is the seventh clause. Each state shall cause an inquiry to be held by or before a suitably qualified person or persons into every maritime casualty or the incident of navigation in the on the high seas involving a ship flying its flag and causing serious life and serious injury to nationals of another state. This is directly relevant. Or serious damage to ship's installment of another ship, the flag state and other state shall cooperate in the conduct of any inquiry held by that other state into any such marine casualty. So they have given this argument and they are themselves not cooperating. Okay. They said that flag state and the state who's taken cognizance of this case are supposed to cooperate in the inquiry. But now what they are saying is that we would cooperate only when you would give us those marines and we would try the case, we would investigate ourselves. So they are not wrong that way, but then we are also not wrong because it happened in near our waters. And also you would see how our domestic laws are extended up till exclusive economic zones, and all these domestic laws are listed with unclause that India के waters के आसपास जाना है तो ये norms को follow करना है because that is their domestic law. Okay. Anyway, आगे देखिएगा. Application of various laws in the case. So Indians accuse the Marines with the charges of murder under the provision of Indian Penal Code 1860, provisions of Maritime Zones Act of 1976, flouting the well-established counter-piracy measures in the sea. There are well-established protocols. When you see, for example, when you are near India's water, what are the protocols which you are supposed to follow when you see an imminent piracy attack? You're supposed to alert India's coast guards, Indian Navy. You are supposed to take their help rather than shooting this thing. I mean, you have shooted them without any protocol, etc. Started shooting on those fishermen. In my first paragraph in this particular paper, I've written this. This was the basic contention of these Italian Marines. The preliminary submissions, I'm in this particular this thing. So preliminary submissions and advanced by the Marines in their defense were, as the fishermen were in international waters, Marine thought them to pirates. Okay, ठीक है, मान लिया. Second, the vessel ignored. They said that the vessel, the Saint Anthony, ignored loud and clear warning shots given by Marines. This is debatable, and this is not. There's no evidence of to support this yet. Okay. This was taken care of by Supreme Court, and there are no evidence that there were warning shots. Saint Anthony and other fishermen around have seriously doubted this claim of Italy. Anyway, the provision. So India has applied IPC Maritime Zones Act, flouting the norms of well-established counter-piracy norms and violating. This is important. Suppression of Unlawful Activities Act against safety of maritime navigation and fixed platforms on Continental Shelf Act 2002, hereinafter called SUA. ठीक है. So after this particular thing, the thing went to Kerala High Court. I told you how Kerala High Court ka cognizance was challenged by Italy, and the case was transferred to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court established a neutral forum to try this case, and the neutral forum was named as National Investigating Agency. The NIA invoked sections of SUA leading to stringent death sentences. So NIA ने क्या किया? It invoked sections which had penalties like stringent death sentences. The application of SUA has specifically angered Italy, और उसी की वजह से वो EU notification official notification was released of 2015, and Italy decided to go to ITLAS and failed in ITLAS, then went to PCOA, and through creative incidental jurisprudence argument, they are able to invoke the jurisdiction of Permanent Court of Arbitration. Now, India's attempt to establish its jurisdiction upon the case and the Italian rebuttal. Okay, so Kabir Chief Justice, while extending the scope of Section 2 of the IPC, stated that India's territorial waters extend up to 24 nautical miles. You can put hyphen here as contiguous zone as well. Okay, citing the Home Ministry's notification as this was the name of the notification, SO 671A of 27th August 1981. This 1981 Home Ministry notification extended the scope of India's criminal laws up till many of the criminal laws up till 24 nautical miles, matlab up till the extent of contiguous zone, and some of the provisions of India's criminal laws up till the extent of exclusive economic zone as well. The notification gave extraterritorial jurisdiction to India beyond the territorial waters with respect to certain offenses. Okay, so therefore he held that the Union of India is entitled to prosecute the Italian Marines under the criminal justice system prevalent in the country. That was the main contention of Indian Supreme Court. Chief Justice Altamas Kabir said so. So Justice Chela Meshwar, we are especially proud of him. End of the day, he's from our college. So Justice Chela Meshwar gave a concurring opinion regarding the application of Indian Penal Code to the case, stating it to be a legal fiction. He said he gave a concurring opinion with respect to the application of IPC in contiguous zones, said that it is a legal fiction under the Maritime Zones Act 1976. He opined that, and this was also concurred. There is an evidence that same thing has been said by Justice Liang in MV Saiga Itlos arbitration in a separate opinion. So I'll have some lines from there as well. Justice Chela Meshwar, he opined that Article 33 of UNCLOS, which deals with the extent of contiguous zones. Article 33 just says that a contiguous zone extends after 12 nautical mile to further 12 nautical miles. So overall, from 12 to 24, 12 to 24 nautical miles the contiguous zone रहता है. Anyway, so he opined that Article 33 of UNCLOS, which deals with the extent of contiguous zone and the power to be exercised up till 24 nautical mile by the coastal state, is a product of hasty negotiations, complex drafting, and incoherent state practices. Matlab, some state have interpreted it some differently, some and which are not settled. So Article 33 is a gray area in the law of the sea, thus making the question of jurisdiction of coastal states an open one. So we are free to interpret it according to our own interests. Justice Liang, in his separate opinion in the MV Saiga case, MV Saiga case was between Saint Vincent and Grenadines versus Guinea. Okay, the country of Guinea. It was a case of hot pursuit, and they have detained their ship and all. You can Google that. Justice Liang, in his separate opinion in the MV Saiga case, took a similar position with respect to the negotiating history of UNCLOS. He said, yes, Article 33, etc., are those areas of UNCLOS which has a complex history of negotiation with incoherent state practices, and therefore it is a legal gray area, and states are free. This particular question is open for the states, and states are free to interpret it in their own interest. Okay. Further, Justice Chela Meshwar went a step ahead to expand the traditional notion of sovereign rights to sovereignty in areas up to 24 nautical miles. The concept of sovereignty and sovereign rights was touched upon by me in the last webinar. This is in sharp contrast to UNCLOS, as it specifically mentions the power of coastal state to exercise only necessary powers up to contiguous zone. Okay. So this particular Justice Chela Meshwar has went a bit further, which is in contravention to the provision of UNCLOS, which I admit that yes, he went wrong in that. He said that we have sovereignty in the contiguous zone. No, we don't have sovereignty in the contiguous zone, because UNCLOS clearly says that you can only have necessary powers. Okay, you can only exercise necessary powers. So your sovereignty is qualified with the notion of necessity, that is, you have sovereign rights only in contiguous zones. Okay, fine, but then we have our extension of Maritime Zones Act, SUA, and IPC beyond 12 nautical miles as well. So therefore, what amounts to necessity would be read according to domestic law of India. So this is another counter argument out here by some jurists. Further, he says that Justice Chela Meshwar says that Section 6.6 and Section 7.7 of Maritime Zones Act empower the central government to extend India's sovereignty in the contiguous zone and exclusive economic zone. India's sovereign. These are the words used in this statute. India's sovereignty in the contiguous zone and exclusive economic zone. This gives legitimacy to Home Ministry's notification dated 27th August 1981. That particular notification. There is an accepted jurisprudence in India that her rights in contiguous zone and EEZ is not limited just to sovereign rights. So overall conclusion is this. But I am categorically telling you that this particular stance taken by India is condemned because is usually condemned because it is against the express provisions of UNCLOS. Again, India's position got stronger with the combined reading of Section 188 of CRPC, which deals with Section 188 deals with lays down the procedure to establish India's jurisdiction for offences committed in EEZ. Okay, so India's position gets stronger with the combined reading of Section 188 of CRPC and Article 245 of India's Constitution. Article 245 expressly declares that no law made by Parliament shall be deemed to be invalid on the ground that it would have extraterritorial or territorial obligation. So it is directly in contravention to a statutory law as well as our constitutional law. India's assertion of extraterritorial jurisdiction is also laid down in Section 1(2), read with Section 2 of SUA 2002. In the opinion of Justice Chelameshwar, the 19th century, he calls this particular principle कि आप extraterritorial jurisdiction नहीं कर सकते, उसको age old मानते हैं. Justice Chelameshwar is that league of jurists who consider कि such are age old principles which need reformation, and since till the time there are no formal laws established to do away with extraterritorial jurisdiction, we as judges are duty bound to invoke them in the interest of in the national interests, especially in the time when we have internet, etc. He gave the example of in his ratio, he gave the example of internet related cyber crimes as well. Okay. So Justice Shelameshwar says that the 19th century principle of English jurisprudence that all crimes are local does not hold ground in contemporary times. So whenever in future, when you will argue for cyber crimes, etc., or Facebook or data privacy related, you can always give this particular argument made by our Supreme Court, laid down by our Supreme Court, that all crimes are local does not hold good in contemporary times. That is India's jurisprudence, and we are duty bound to follow that. Anyway, as future lawyers, it would be beneficial for you. Or who are lawyers, they can also use this. I found this in this particular judgment. Anyway, so question of sovereign immunity. So I'm done with the jurisdiction aspect. So how India's domestic law applies to extraterritorial jurisdiction in contiguous zone, number one, and number two, why PCA was wrong in its ruling by invoking incidental jurisdiction and connecting it to the principal norm according to Article 288, where they went wrong, etc., is what I wanted to pitch up. Of course, I'm giving this webinar from India in India, so I'm defending it from the India's perspective. Of course, there are counter perspectives as well, and yes, I would want you to read as much as possible. I would be giving certain links which you can read, yourself. Uh, uh, I would be sharing it with the Spill, and Spill would share it with you, and you can read them and get the idea how this rebuttal is shaping, or the now it's only for academic utility, this particular case. So how the contentions of India are stronger, how contentions of Italy are stronger, where Italy's arguments are going wrong, etc., etc. There are range of blogs being written in various international law journals, which I have taken the links of. All my presentation is a summary of all those things, which you can read. I would share it with you. Last, the question of sovereign immunity of Italian Marines. In the absence of any specific agreement between India and Italy, the applicable agreement defining the sovereign immunity of Marines will be Status of Forces Agreement. These are agreements, ye generally not only for sovereign immunity, they are also used for humanitarian purposes. Say, for example, in my research of disaster law, found that these international humanitarian organizations, they go for international aid in countries like, for example, like Haiti. Take the example of Haiti. It's also called Republic of NGO because NGOs are so much that state is itself not powerful, not as powerful as NGO in Haiti. So in Haiti, when that earthquake happened, a lot of NGOs came in and they signed the status of forces agreement with Haiti that guaranteed what are the rights and obligations of humanitarian agencies while working in disaster relief in Haiti. Of course, these status of forces agreements are usually violated in practice, but they are there. Okay, so reading that, understanding status of forces agreement, now you read it again. In the absence of any specific agreement between India and Italy, the applicable agreement defining sovereign immunity of the Marines will be status of forces agreement, which tends to tilt the balance in favor of sovereign immunity. Okay, fine. A major challenge to the exercise of sovereign immunity of Italian Marines come from the combined reading of Article 32 and subsection A of UNCLOS. Subsection A is too long, but we would read Article 32 of UNCLOS here. Yeah. Immunities of warships and other government ships operated for non-commercial purposes, with such exceptions as are contained in subsection A and in Article 30 and 31. Nothing in this convention affects the immunity of warships and other government ships operated for non-commercial purposes. Mind it, Enrica Lexi was a non-commercial, uh, it was a non-commercial, non-governmental private tanker. So this Article 32 doesn't apply. You can later, for your own knowledge, read the complete subsection 1. This is the complete subsection 1, Article 31, 32, etc. सबसेक्शन वन का ये सेक्शन वन का सबसेक्शन सी है, इसको पूरा पढ़ सकते हैं. It talks about the duties and obligations of warships, but then it is again not relevant here because end of the day Enric Alexi is a private oil tanker and these norms with respect to warships are not applicable. And my initial argument or rebuttal with respect to Article 87(1)(a), Article 90 and Article 58 still holds good. And now I'll conclude this. I would read my words only directly. Concluding the jurisdiction debate from the perspective of Supreme Court vis-a-vis international law, it is clear that it was not a cakewalk for Indian Supreme Court. Respecting sovereign immunity is the customary norm of international law. Marines ought to have been granted the immunity provided their conduct was not overtly malified. Ought to have, but their conduct was overtly malified. So therefore, there is an argument that they would not be liable, or they cannot be granted sovereign immunity because their conduct was malified. Okay. Proving the malicious intent in the court of law is a Herculean task, especially when the coveted naval officers are involved. They can always take the guise of official duty. Okay. Finally, India was granted the compensation in this case, and Italy got the right to try the case against Marines. India must learn the art of creative thinking. Analyzing the words of the judgment, it is clear that we did well in invoking the norms of UNCLOS, but did not fare well against the creative interpretation of the opposite party when they invoked the notion of incidental jurisdiction. Thank you so much. That is it for me from my side. I'm open for questions now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. We've got quite a few questions. If I may begin. So,
Yes.
a student has asked, can a military vessel's murder of civilians be charged under the Geneva Convention as a war crime?
Yes, yes, they can. The straight answer is yes, they can. But then uh, the idea is that military officials are to be tried by nation they belong to. They have sovereign immunity. Of course, they are bound with couple of law of war principles. Those are listed in Geneva Convention 1 and 2 and additional protocols. But if they don't violate it and still are responsible for war crimes, uh, they don't have sovereign immunity. But when of course again, this has to be read with recent judgment of international recent invoking of jurisdiction of International Criminal Court, where US denied its jurisdiction for against the official immunity of their own officials. when they were being tried in the ICC, and Donald Trump he expressed that he would walk out of ICC in case he would walk out of Rome Statute if Rome Statute tried to take cognizance of its own officials. So end of the day, international law also works with diplomacy. So these are not straight questions, and there are no straight answers. But short answer is yes. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is, what could have been the possible contentions argued and provided by the Italian counterpart if the situation was different? That is, if the incident had occurred within the jurisdiction of Kochi, within 12 nautical miles, would the argument of the functional immunity have stayed or been considered at all?
I don't think so. They would have at any phase to even argue for sovereign immunity if this particular incident would have occurred in our territorial waters. The main debate and rebuttal only happened because it happened in contiguous.
Right. So, thank you. Another question is, do you think that the Supreme Court could have been more authoritative regarding the Marines' immunity?
Mm, yes, it could have, but there are something called friendly relations between nation states, and that is governed with Friendly Relations Convention 1970. You cannot violate that. Please read that. We cannot violate that. So Supreme Court has to take cognizance of certain friendly relation norms as well. And at end of the day, you are trying someone who has sovereign immunity. You know it. And sovereign immunity is a customary norm of international law. It is as good as right to life in international law. So, it is not that easy to violate that.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, who decides the constitution of the bench of the tribunal of the Permanent Court of Arbitration for each case?
Okay, that's a procedural question, and that is usually decided by majority vote by the already pool of arbitrators in PCA.
Right. Thank you.
बस
So,
इसमें एक थोड़ा सा जो वो है क्या कहते हैं ट्विस्ट है वो ये है कि आपके नेशन के जजेस आर परमिटेड ऑन द बेंच
oh, okay.
but the president cannot be from your country.
All right. The next question is there any scope for appeal? And if so, why didn't India go into appeal of some kind?
There is a scope of appeal, but that appeal can only be invoked in the PCA according to Annex 7 only. Okay, and that is very hard to make because we will have to find a dispute regarding interpretation and application of UNCLOS. That is, we have to find that principal norm according to Article 288 to re-invoke the jurisdiction of PCA. Number one, and number two question. What was the second part? I forgot.
Um, if they could go into any appeal, why didn't they?
Why didn't they go? Why didn't they go? Because it is still pending. It is not the final judgment.
All right. So the next question is, as maintained by the Italian authorities, the delayed process of legal proceedings, which resulted in the detention of the Marines, was argued to be a serious breach of their human rights. It was further initiated to obstruct India's jurisdiction of the case. In this case, how do you feel? How important do you think the role of speedy justice plays over here?
Role of speedy justice, I mean, forget about this particular case. The notion of speedy justice and the reform in judicial system is very much required. I mean, end of the day, you need to ensure speedy justice for the victims. I mean, we are a common law jurisprudence, and we believe the person to be innocent until found guilty, and uh, and uh, and if we believe that a person is innocent until found guilty, and that innocent person is detained in jails of your country, and that to a foreign national is detained into the jails of your country without any criminal charges, you get outrightly wrong. At least be quick to frame the charges. That's what I told in the last webinar as well, that we were grossly wrong out here, that we took 3 years to frame the charge.
Right, so And so the last question over here is, if you personally feel there was an overall breach of justice.
Yes, I have made my position very clear. I personally feel that Permanent Court of Arbitration should have not taken cognizance of this case, because the invocation of incidental jurisdiction, the argument made by PCOA, was itself faulty. I mean, it was itself against its own jurisdiction laid down in Chagos case and South China's arbitration case. For more further clarity, I would request you to read Chagos arbitration ruling as well as South China arbitration ruling, especially South China arbitration is big. So South China arbitration ruling, write Control F and type the word objective. Okay, then you would read that you would reach that part of objective understanding of Article 288 given in South China Sea arbitration. And if any question, I'm available on mail. My email ID is sudhir.research@gmail.com.
Yes, sir. So Alessandra has asked if you had argued this case, do you think the judgment would have come in India's favor?
मुझे ऐसा लगता है. But then that would be too much self praising. These international arguments are not that easy, because trust me, these lawyers who argue are man of repute of their own country. You know how these lawyers are selected in the respective countries. They are best in the field. Okay, and I have just entered in this field, so uh, there must have been strong reasons why India has not contested important claims. That just not only is related to the death of fishermen. There can be diplomatic aspects as well. There
Right.
might be back channel diplomacy between India and Italy, which has restricted our lawyers to argue certain things. For academic debate, I have argued all the contentions which they could have made. Of course, if I can think of these contentions, they would have definitely thought of these contentions. I have complete trust upon the intellect of uh, people who are legal luminaries, even in India. The only thing is that some back channel diplomacy also works. So international law is not that straight. It's just not the moot court where you prepare your case and rebuttal. There are range of dynamics which go behind it, Alexandra.
Right, sir.
Uh,
Thank you. So a student has asked whether you will be sharing the PDF or document of the paper that you have presented over here.
Let it get published, please. I will
All right,
definitely do that.
all right, sir.
Yeah,
Okay,
I would be happy to share it, and I would want you to share it further.
definitely. So, on behalf of Spill Mumbai, we would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to Mr. Sudhir Verma for taking time out for us today afternoon and for an extremely enlightening talk. As you can see, many people have said that it was a very informative and excellent interpretation of the case, and that you have done an amazing job. So, a big thank you to all the participants who joined us today evening. We hope to see you again for Spills events in the future. You could find the recording of the part one and part two of the webinar series on our YouTube channel, which is Spill Mumbai. Please follow Spill Mumbai on our social media platforms to get updates on future events. Thank you all once again. Thank you, sir.
Most welcome, Spill. Thank you so much for organizing this. Thank you, participants, for bearing with me and keeping patience with me. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you so much for appreciating me. It gives me added vigor to do